This case takes place in the UK on the 23rd of September 2015. Mark van Dongen was a 28-year-old man from the Netherlands who had been living in Bristol in the UK for some time. Mark was a very successful businessman who ran a fashion and lifestyle website and was also a part owner of a clothing shop. He was making good money and was very happy with how his life was going. But the one thing that was missing was a girlfriend. That was until he met a 48-year-old fashion student named Belinda Wallace. Mark described her as an intelligent woman who was interesting and fun to be around. As far as Mark was concerned, the relationship was going well. They had been together for about a year, but Belinda was becoming increasingly paranoid. She was convinced that he was going to go back to his ex-girlfriend, something that Mark told her to do on multiple occasions was not going to happen. Mark's friends would later say that she was very insecure and very clingy. After a year of the relationship, Mark decided it was best to end it. Mark had gotten tired of her Cochrane-esque behaviour, and she was paranoid of Mark's EXT. He told her that he needed space and that their relationship was over. This has to be one of the worst things you could tell your girlfriend, especially if she has a tendency of being paranoid. Belinda was furious at the prospect of losing Mark. In a last-ditch effort to save the relationship, she demanded that Mark come over to her flat and told him that if he did not, she would take her own life. Mark had no intention of getting back together, but was deeply concerned for Belinda. He went over to her flat on the 23rd of September 2015. Upon entering, Belinda began the usual tactics women use to try and save a relationship: begging, crying, and pleading. But when this didn't work, she pulled out a mug from a nearby cupboard and tossed its contents over Mark. The mug was filled with a strange, dark, oily liquid. But this was no coffee or tea. She had prepared a mug filled with concentrated sulfuric acid, which is more commonly known as battery acid. Mark immediately felt an extreme burning sensation on his skin, which was literally on fire. The oil-like substance was destroying and melting his skin and underlying tissue, and had also gone into his mouth, causing similar damage. He spat the acid from his mouth over the floor and saw white particles come off as it puckered, like it did on his skin. The white substance was his flesh, as it fell off and exposed the muscle and tendon. Mark was able to run into the streets in search of assistance, but passers-by were not willing to help him. Presumably because of the shocking state his injuries had left him in, they just didn't believe him. Mark began pleading for somebody to call an ambulance, but this was to no avail. Mark began losing consciousness, but he was able to make his way around to the back of the flats where he lived to get some help from his neighbours. Despite being injured to a serious degree, Mark was still able to jump over a 6-foot fence to get to his neighbour's back garden. After getting over the fence, Mark knocked on the back door of their home, hoping for somebody to help him. The neighbour had just gotten out of the shower and was not expecting to open the door to a man with severe chemical burns. Mark's skin was almost black and was coming off in clumps. The neighbour quickly grabbed some towels to help Mark. As he did this, Mark began shaking violently. The neighbour asked Mark if he had been set on fire, but Mark replied by telling him that his ex-girlfriend had thrown acid in his face. A few moments passed by with Mark slowly losing consciousness. The neighbour realised that the towels were not helping, as the liquid had fully saturated through to the other side and was now burning his hands as if the skin was on fire. Mark told the neighbour, who threw the acid over him. He said the words, "She's done this to me," referring, of course, to Belinda. Mark then told his neighbour that he was going to die. An ambulance was called and arrived 30 minutes after Mark had been attacked, which was of course far too late. Mark was taken into the back of the ambulance, and it's here where things get extremely grim. As I said earlier, Mark had spat acid from his mouth, and as he did this, he ingested some, which had made its way into his lungs. Mark began vomiting a green substance and was foaming from the mouth. Even after a couple of days, his vomit would still contain this green substance, which was still corroding and burning his internal organs. As they rushed him to the hospital, Mark began convulsing. When they arrived, he was convulsing violently. His body appeared to be barely holding on. However, Mark was able to divert his attention from the pain long enough to call his father to tell him what had happened to him. He told his father to come to Bristol to be with him. Mark's father flew to the UK without hesitation and made his way to the hospital in Bristol. But when he arrived, he was informed that Mark was dead. Mark was taken off the ventilator as the doctors explained to Mark's father that there was nothing they could do for him and that the acid had caused too much damage to his lungs and that he wouldn't be able to breathe without the assistance of a ventilator the rest of his life. Mark's injuries were so bad that even the doctors described his condition as gruesome. He was unable to move or talk, only able to make texting-like sounds with his lips. Mark had gone into the flat and had been yar-fingered, deceived, and left to die in agonising, burning pain. His attacker was not through with him yet. She had called the police to let them know that she had thrown acid in the face of Mark, but that she did not do it on purpose. Berliner was arrested and told the police that Mark had forced his way into her home and that she had thrown the acid in self-defence to blind him whilst she tried to hit him with a hammer. Berliner was told that Mark was in fact dead. Upon hearing this, Berliner showed no remorse or sadness, stating coldly, "He was the one who was abusive and controlling, not me." Mark's father did not accept the fact that his son was never going to be able to leave the hospital. Not in the UK, anyway. In the UK, an individual's right to die is not legally allowed to be assisted. However, it is legal in Belgium. Mark's father was able to get Mark transferred to a hospital in Belgium, so Mark himself could make the decision to end his life. Mark was asked by a medical professional if he was sure that this was what he wanted, to which Mark was able to muster a reply. He said, yes. Mark was helped to end his life in January of 2017, 7 months after the initial attack. This is where things get even more despicable. Berliner's trial date was set for October of 2018. As the trial approached, Berliner's story changed. She now told the court that on the night of the attack, she and Mark had planned to end their lives. She claimed that Mark had given her a can of petrol and some acid, and told her to put it in the microwave to heat it up and throw it over him to end his life. Berliner claimed that the plan was to make it look like a murder and pass the blame onto Mark's heating engineer ex-girlfriend. After screwing up the plan, Berliner said she saw Mark as an opportunity to try and get back at her ex-boyfriend, who she claimed had also abused her in the same way, and she threw the acid in his face on purpose. Berliner continued to lie and claim that the Google search had been made by her for information for college. Despite being told by the police that Mark was dead, Berliner still refused to admit to higher intent. She still tried to claim that Mark had forced his way into her home and had threatened to hurt her. Upon seeing this, Mark's family became enraged, as they knew this was untrue. Mark was in a horrific state and had no reason to lie about what happened. When speaking about Mark, the prosecutor said, "In terms of his skin, by the time he died, he was covered in a large amount of medicated bandages. He was unable to speak as his mouth had been so horrifically damaged. I'm told he had been unable to leave the hospital bed for some weeks before he died." Berliner was found guilty of throwing a corrosive substance with intent and is now serving a 12-year sentence. When speaking about the sentence afterwards, Mark's father said, "We must know that the judge chose this punishment deliberately." In choosing this punishment, the judge decided evil must not be sterilised or withdrawn, but actually rooted out. We must remember Angela Wood. Angela Wood committed a crime exactly the same as what Berliner did: throw sulfuric acid at a man's face at close range. Angela Wood was sentenced to life and was released after 7th years. I am worried that we will find ourselves having to repeat what happened here today. My fear is that if the sentence for this case is 12 years, as now, then in the future more people will be attacked and possibly even die. I am also worried that the judge didn't mention anything about Berliner. It seems like the UK is now a country where the victim must actually die for a criminal to be punished. If Mark was still alive and was here today, then the judge would actually only have given 2 to 3 years. Mark's father continued to say that he believes the attacks are getting more violent and becoming more and more common. I'm worried that throwing acid in someone's face will become a fashion or trend. Everyone's saying it. If I go to home base, everyone's talking to each other and saying, "This acid, this acid, this acid." I notice people are mentioning it more and more frequently. It's scary. I see it everywhere. If someone gets into an argument with someone over the weekend, someone will say, "I'll come back and chuck acid in your face." So it's becoming a fashion, and I'm worried about this. Many of the cases I cover on my channel are somewhat dark and twisted, but I do of course have a favourite, and Acid Attack Mark is that case. For obvious reasons, I find acid attacks to be particularly horrific, and with all of the problems in the world, it seems like the attacks are becoming more and more common and are a lot more accessible. I will be doing an extended video on the case of Mark and Berliner, which will be coming in the next couple of weeks.